Welcome to the Hoosier Basketball Experience. We are so fortunate again this week to have Jerry Sichting come on the show and talk with us via Zoom from Florida. We talked last week about his great high school career, about his great college career at Purdue. Now we get to dive into the NBA draft, teams that Jerry played for, including your Indiana Pacers. For 10 years he played in the NBA and then went on to be an NBA coach. You get to hear about all of it when we come back after these messages.
The Hoosier Basketball Trivia Question, sponsored by Christy, Farrell, Lee, and Bell. Serious injury isn't what we do, it's all we do. Today's question, what is the most points ever scored by one player in Indiana basketball history? The answer after the break. Now our trivia question answered, sponsored by Christy, Farrell, Lee, and Bell. Serious injury isn't what we do, it's all we do. Today's question, what is the most points ever scored by one player in Indiana basketball history? The answer, 113.
Welcome back to the Hoosier Basketball Experience. Jerry, again, thanks for being here. I want to talk about the NBA draft. When is the first time that you ever realized that you had an opportunity to play in the league?
Well, I've got to be honest. I really didn't give it a whole lot of thought. You know, the one thing that I had going for me in college was the fact that I played against so many great players. You know, in the Big Ten, the point guards were like Ricky Green and Ronnie Lester, Quinn Buckner, Wes Matthews, Kelvin Ramsey. I mean, you could go on and on. All those guys became pros. Billy McKinney. Every team had a pro point guard. And so as I kind of watched those guys get into the league, I thought, well, maybe I have an outside chance. You know, I really didn't have really any expectations that I was going to be an NBA player. But, you know, I thought I could play with those guys. But, you know, the league only had like 23 teams and there weren't near as many jobs as there are now. So I did go to a couple things that agents set up and pro scouts would come and watch, but you know, it's totally different now than way back it was back then. So I knew I'd probably be drafted sometime because there were 10 rounds in the NBA draft in those years, and now there's only 2. So yeah, it was just a matter of being lucky and getting on the right team.
Well, you're being humble. I knew as going into my junior year, having seen you play as a sophomore, that you were going to be an NBA player. And fortunate for the Pacers, they draft you. Talk about finding out that you had been drafted by the Pacers, and talk a little bit about that introduction to the Indiana Pacers here in Indianapolis.
Well, I got to back up a little bit, because when I got drafted, I was drafted actually in '79 by the Golden State Warriors. Okay. And so I was working at a basketball camp in Purdue in the summer, and you know, the NBA draft wasn't like it is now. It wasn't on national TV and all that going on. So it was probably, I don't know, a few hours after the draft before I even knew I was drafted. And so I did get word when I was at the camp that you got drafted in the 4th round, the 3rd player taken by Golden State. The 1 round they didn't have a pick, but so I went to Golden State. I was one of the last guys cut. They had a pretty good backcourt in those days. And so the next year I lived in Indianapolis and worked for a sporting goods company in Indianapolis. And then I tried out for the Pacers as a free agent the next summer. Okay. And had to go through a series of tryouts, so to speak, and play in the summer league. And I was the last guy to make the team then come training camp at Mackey Arena. They had training camp in Mackey Arena that year.
I had forgotten that. I had thought you were drafted by the Pacers, now that you say that. So you get drafted by the Warriors. Who do you remember who the other 2 were that got drafted in front of you for Golden State? It's a long time ago.
One guy, I remember one. I don't know if I remember both. One guy's name was Cheese Johnson. He was from New York, and he played at Wichita State. Yeah. And off the top of my head right now, I can't remember the other player. But Cheese did make the team for part of the year, and then they cut him.
So
but they had John Lucas, JoJo White, Phil. They had a lot of
loaded
good players in the backcourt.
So talk about the process that the Pacers had in terms of looking at free agents and putting you through workouts and how that actually worked.
Well, it was a strange time for the Pacers because they almost went insolvent because they were running out of money. And I don't know, a lot of people out there, the real old Pacer fans will remember that Bobby Leonard and his wife Nancy put together this auction thing that actually fundraiser to keep him going an extra year. And then a guy from California, Sam Nassi was his name. He was kind of buddies with Jerry Buss that owned the Lakers. He came in and bought the Pacers pretty cheap. Nobody in town wanted to buy him. And so they hired Jack McKinney that year.
Oh,
Jack McKinney was the coach of the Lakers, and then he had a bicycle wreck. And he had a terrible concussion. He was in a coma for a couple weeks. When he came out of his coma, he didn't have a job anymore. That was Magic Johnson's rookie year, and they ended up winning the world championship. Yeah. And so as a favor to Jerry Buss, Sam Nassi hires him for the Pacers.
Okay.
And so because he'd had this trauma to his head and he hadn't coached for a while, the Pacers, as kind of a media introducing him to the city of Indianapolis, they concocted this free agent Walter Mitty camp, they called it.
Oh, yeah.
And they invited local guys to come and try out. And so that was my first. I called up Jerry Oliver, who was assistant to Bobby Leonard the year before. He was kind of running this thing in the front office, and I called him up. He goes, "You're exactly who we're looking for. Yeah, come to this thing." And so that set up a series of tryouts. So from there, Jack named 5 guys to go play in the summer league in L.A. and then came back for to try out to go to the regular training camp.
Boy, that is the kind of story, right? That is the Hoosier basketball experience. You were with the Pacers 4 or 5 years?
5 years, yes.
5 years. Just off the top of your head, throw out some of the names of the teammates that you had over those years.
Well, my rookie year, we had a pretty good team. We had George McGinnis came back the year before. They had traded Alex English for McGinnis. He was in Denver, so he came back to finish his career with the Pacers. And then James Edwards was the starting center. Mike Bannum was on the team. Johnny Davis, Billy Knight, Don Boozy we traded for real early in the season. I think they thought I was a little bit too green to back up Johnny Davis or whatever. So we brought in a veteran guy like Boozy to finish his career with the Pacers. So it was a lot of guys that the old-time Pacer fans would recognize.
Sure.
And we made the playoffs the first year. I didn't get to play very much at all. We made the playoffs that year. But then Sam Nassi didn't want to really invest that much money in the team, and so he started liquidating the assets, so to speak. So a lot of those guys that were playing in front of me, he just let them go, and he just got some younger guys cheap that weren't very good. So that's how I started getting a lot of playing time and kind of got my foot in the door and was able to get a little niche in the league because at my 3rd year and 4th year, I started for 2 years.
Yeah, then in this last minute before our break, talk about the move to the Celtics.
Okay, well, after my 5th year, I signed a series of 1-year contracts, and I'm too embarrassed to say what we were making back in those days. It wasn't any money, Phil, as you have a pretty good idea. But so finally, I played well enough, though, that there were some teams that had some interest in me. And I actually made the call to the Celtics myself. And I talked to Chris Ford, who was an assistant coach there, that I had played against. And we didn't know each other very well. But I called, and to my surprise, they called back the next day and said they had a lot of interest in me. So that's how it started.
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk to Jerry not only about his playing for the Boston Celtics, but winning a world championship. We're also going to talk about a legendary fight and then Jerry's experience as a longtime NBA coach. All of that with Jerry Sichting when we come back after these messages. Welcome back to the Hoosier Basketball Experience with Jerry Sichting today. Jerry, we've got to talk about having a Hoosier like you play for the Boston Celtics. Talk about how that started and how it ended.
Well, as I mentioned before the break, I made the first call, and then they contacted me, and then they were talking to my agent, and I ended up signing with them as a free agent in the summer of '85. And then in those years, the teams had 15 days to match it or let you go. So the Simon brothers, Mel and Herb Simon, had bought the Pacers a couple years before. I played under their ownership for 3 years, I think. So they told me they were going to match it. Herb had me come to his house with the head coach, George Irvin, at the time, and he said he wanted me to be a Pacer for life after I'd already signed the contract. And I, 28 years old, here's the owner of the team having me over to his house, and I had to look him right in the eye, and I said, it's nothing against you, Mr. Simon. I said, but I want to go play for the Boston Celtics. And so that's the way we left it. That was before they matched the contract. They went ahead and matched it, and then there was a trade, and Quinn Buckner was one of the players involved in the trade, and a couple of draft choices Boston sent to the Pacers, and that's how eventually I got to be going to Boston.
So that's 85, 86. Again, talk about the roster that Boston had put together for that World Championship run in '86.
Yeah, it was an incredible team. I mean, Bill Walton came that same year. They added him, and then we had Scott Webman also that came off the bench. And then our starting five was Ainge, Dennis Johnson, Bird, McHale, and Parrish. So there were 7 guys on that team that were all-stars, and 5 of those guys were Hall of Fame players. So it was, I was, my last 2 years with Indiana, we had 5 rookies each year. Yeah. 5 my 4th year, and then 5 so all of a sudden, I'm going to a team that's basically an all-star team, and I just felt out of place, to tell you the truth. I mean, but it was easy to play with those guys. I didn't have to be a great athlete or player. I just had to know when to get those guys the ball, where to space, and then a lot of them were getting double teamed. Our front line would always get double teamed, so I was open a lot when I was in the game. So they basically, when I met with K.C. Jones that summer beforehand, he just told me what my role was going to be. He goes, you're going to come in off the bench. We're trying to win every single game that we play. It's going to be different here than where you came from. He goes, we're trying to win 82 games. Yeah. So it just, you slowly just got in there, and there were so many veterans. Everybody knew what to do. You're playing for a coach that didn't have to motivate any of these guys. They were pros, and they'd been there before, and it was a lot of fun. I can't even tell you how much fun it was.
Talk a little bit about, because you did play. I watched that team play, and you made your way onto the floor plenty. But was there a particular rotation or particular situations where you knew you were going to get more time than others?
Well, there were, the season is so long, there's always going to be a few times here or there where a guy's banged up. Either Ainge was out or DJ might be out a little bit. And really, KC tried to stay with a 3-guard rotation a lot. So Carlisle was the 4th guard. He got some time, but I actually had the 6th amount of minutes on that team that year. Yeah. And the funny thing was, Bill Walton won 6th Man of the Year. So I used to go up to Walton afterwards and say, how did you get to be 6th Man of the league when you were even the 6th man on the team? and so
that's hilarious.
It was a lot of fun because we all just gave each other grief all the time. But I did get a lot of minutes. I would go in late first quarter and then play, halfway. I played it like 18 or 19 minutes a game is what it was. So, it's plenty of time to be out there and to break a good sweat. You weren't going to play 3 or 4 minutes and then come out. You were going to play, close to 10 minutes each half.
Hey, talk about the the run through the playoffs and who you went up against during the playoff run to the championship.
So we played Chicago with Jordan, and that was the great coming out party of Jordan. See, Jordan had this was his second year. He'd broken his foot. He missed most of the regular season, and everybody that's watched the documentary on him last year knows the whole story. So he came back. The team didn't really want him to take a chance on breaking his foot, but he came back. And so we played Chicago that first series. That's where he had the 63-point game in the double overtime. And then we played Atlanta the second round, and they had a good team, Dominique Wilkins and all those guys, Tree Rollins. Then we played Milwaukee, and then everybody was looking for a replay because in 85, the Lakers had beaten the Celtics in the finals. And so everybody was anticipating another Celtic Lakers, but the Lakers were off a little bit that year. They were the number one seed, but they got upset by the Rockets in the Western Conference Finals, so we ended up playing Houston in the finals.
So a great run to the championship in '86. I mentioned earlier the fight. Some of our fans and viewers might not know about that, but I can still remember, and you can obviously give the depiction much better than I can. My recollection is that somehow you got switched on to Sampson in the post, and I think maybe he pushes you in the back or the head, and you go after him, and he throws a punch. Is that how that happened?
Well, I didn't really go after him. You're pretty close, yeah. Because what happened? It was a play where he wasn't blocked out. A shot goes up, and I came over and got into his legs and kind of got my hips into his legs to keep him from getting to the basket. And he swung a forearm and hit me in the back of the neck, shoulder area, and pretty good blow with his forearm. And I turned around and started walking up to him with my palms up, like, "What are you doing?" And the referee called a foul on him. I mean, it was clear that he fouled me. And that's when he just swung. He just my hands were down. Luckily, I wasn't real close. I could feign backwards a little bit, and it didn't knock me down, but he got me pretty good.
What I remember is DJ then goes after him, and then it's Katie by the door. I mean, the bench unloads, the police come out. I think he ends up getting thrown out of the game, didn't he?
Yes, he got thrown out of the game. The benches. This was before the rules that if you left the bench, you were tossed out of the game and even suspended for the next game. It got to. So there were more fights back in those days, but. Yeah, in fact, to your point, one of the policemen had me with my arms pinned back at one point. And I saw a guy after the game. I said, that's how guys really get hurt. You can't, you shouldn't have been out there on the floor getting in between guys, not getting somebody from behind. So I was upset with that guy, and I saw him when I left the building.
Well, a great way to end with the Celtics. You played with a number of other teams, had a great NBA career. I think it lasted 10 years. In our last few minutes, though, talk about you had the great opportunity to make so many friends in the coaching world in the NBA, and I know you were sort of a journeyman on a lot of different teams, but maybe start with the Timberwolves and talk about your time there and the relationships that were built as a result of that.
Right. Well, I got to the Timberwolves. I did radio for the Celtics for 4 years when I retired. So I kind of rekindled and was back when Bird and McHale both retired and was around the team all the time then. So when McHale took over out of Minnesota, when he retired from playing, he went back to Minnesota, and the new owner of the Timberwolves hired him to be the vice president of basketball. So he got in touch with me. He knew I had some designs on doing something else besides broadcasting, and he hired me as director of scouting initially. And so I went to Boston to Minnesota, and I was director of scouting. Flip Saunders he hired as his general manager, so I was working with Flip. And then early in that season, and Kevin knew when he hired Flip that he was going to give him the job at some point. So early on when I got there, Flip became the head coach, and Flip asked me to come on the bench and be an assistant. So for 2 or 3 years, though, I did both jobs. I was doing assistant coach, and I was still traveling, scouting college players, and that's why it was a lot of hours in those first couple of years up there.
And I know here in our last minute that you did the same thing for about 5 different NBA teams. Great NBA coaching career. But you also coach college at Marquette. In our last segment here, talk about the difference between coaching college and coaching NBA.
Yeah, another connection with an IU guy. I coached with Tom Crean at Marquette. And I really enjoyed it that year. I did. I was out of pro basketball for a year, and then Coach Crean called me up, asked me if I was interested in coming to college. I resisted it first, and then I ended up going there, and we had a great team. I mean, we had a team that beat a lot of other good coaches. We beat Knight, Krzyzewski, Patino, Calhoun, all in the 1 year I was at Marquette. So it was a lot of fun. And to tell you the truth, had I known, then I got offered a job to come back in the NBA. But had I known that Coach Crean was going to go to IU after 1 more year, I probably would have stayed and tried to stay at Marquette. Nobody knew what was going to happen after that. But I really did enjoy coaching in college. It's a fun level.
Well, Jerry, thank you so much for being on our show. You are what the Hoosier basketball experience is all about, and we couldn't do it unless people like you, my favorite Purdue player of all time, comes onto the show. That's what you get on the Hoosier basketball experience, and we'll see you again after these messages. Well, thanks for joining us again this Friday. Be sure to tune in next Friday night at 9:30 when you can again see the Hoosier basketball experience. Good night.